Hey Star Trek fans, Dan Gunther here. Welcome to the first new review episode of Star Trek Discovery's 5th and final season. We have a lot to celebrate right now as Star Trek fans. Star Trek Discovery is back for its 5th season, and while it is the last season, and it will be missed, we still have 10 episodes to look at and appreciate over the next few weeks. So without further ado, here are my thoughts on the first two episodes, Red Directive and Under the Twin Moons. For Red Directive, I'll start with the things that I liked about this episode. First of all, I love how far these characters have come over the past few years. Burnham, Saru, Tilly, Stamets, Culber have all progressed and grown, and I love to see it. For Burnham, we've seen her grow from a convicted mutineer to the captain of Discovery, in a character arc that has been a true pleasure to experience over the past few seasons. There have been some bumps along the road, but for the most part, I really enjoy her story. Also a part of her story is Book, and with their relationship having been put through the ringer in the back half of the last season, it feels as though it is at an end with their conversation towards the end of Red Directive. A permanent end? My guess is no, and it will be interesting to see what becomes of it over the course of this season. Saru has similarly undergone tremendous growth. Think back to his character in Season 1, a person defined by a fear of death. Over the course of the past 4 seasons, he has become a seasoned veteran of Starfleet, commanding Discovery for a time, and now, in this episode, being offered the position of ambassador. I also really love his relationship with T'Rina. The obvious chemistry the characters shared that began way back in Season 3 has blossomed into one of the great Trek romances. These two are perfect for each other, and I was truly touched by T'Rina's proposal to Saru at the end of this episode. Stamets' story gets touched on briefly in this episode, and it feels like his story is going to be about what his legacy will end up being. With the Spore Drive project being shelved by Starfleet, what will he do to make a name for himself? As for the newcomer to the cast, Captain Raynor, in this first episode, it's clear that we are to see him as very much at odds with the rest of the Discovery crew, especially, of course, Captain Burnham. Driven by a need to get the job done no matter the cost, and sometimes engaging in totally reckless behavior, it's interesting that he compares himself to the stories he's heard of Burnham. My guess is that Burnham herself will see a great deal of her own past tendencies reflected in Raynor, which will likely result in them finding common ground over the course of the season. Kovich is a character that I've also come to enjoy seeing on the show, played by horror movie maven David Cronenberg. There is, however, so much mystery surrounding his character. He seems to be a therapist, a computer expert, a communications expert, possibly an intelligence agent of some sort, and even more. I hope that with him at the center of this season's mission, we will learn exactly what his role is in the Federation. For now, it kind of seems to be whatever they need him to be at the time. I, of course, also have to touch on the revelation of the central mystery of the season. I love the TNG episode The Chase, the source material upon which this season of Discovery is based. The idea of a progenitor species that conveniently explains all of the humanoid species in Star Trek was definitely a clever one, and I'm genuinely curious to see how Discovery follows up on it. The pursuit of an ancient technology is a fun concept around which to build a season, and I find myself thankful that the central mystery is one of solving a riddle or learning something new, rather than the old standby of something is threatening all life on Earth / the galaxy / the universe. Of course, that might still end up being the case this season, but for now, I'm happy to see that trope in the rearview mirror. Other things I really enjoyed in this episode, the revelation of the android buyer, Fred. I always loved the idea of Data as a timeless individual and was very sad when Nemesis killed him off. I know that with the events of the series Star Trek Picard, he now once again lives on, but putting that aside, I felt that his death squandered a lot of opportunity for the character. The idea of someone like him living for centuries, experiencing ages of history and development, all while remaining practically immortal, is a compelling one. Unfortunately, of course, Fred is rather quickly dispatched in this episode, but it was at least fun to get a glimpse of what living that sort of life might have been like. The two antagonists we've met so far, Mol and Locke, definitely hooked me. I'm curious to learn more about the both of them. For now, they feel like thrill-seeking pirates who are in a little over their heads, but I'm sure there's more to them than that. In the second episode, we learn that Locke is an unknown species, at least to Starfleet, adding a bit more to his mystery. His facial features when first removing the helmet in Red Directive point us in a strange direction, and I don't yet know what to make of him. His protectiveness of Mole, as seen when Fred attacks her, is very apparent, and I'm sure that will factor into things going forward. I also have to give kudos for the scene of the rescue of the desert settlement by the starships Discovery and Antares. The visuals of the two massive vessels acting as an avalanche breaker was stunning, and it's always fun to see starships doing maneuvers we haven't seen before in Star Trek. I would also put Burnham riding a starship at warp in the same category. Pretty cool, and something we haven't really seen before. That said, this kind of leads me into the things I didn't love about the episode. I get a little exhausted with the action sequences that need to be packed into some of these episodes, especially when you're talking about season premieres and season finales. While they are visually stunning and Discovery is no slouch in the special effects department, it still felt a little bit too frenetic to have both the warp spacewalk sequence and the desert speeder bike chase all in the same episode, especially with this episode's need to have the flash forward to the warp riding scene at the start of the show, just so they could start the episode off with some flashy action stuff. Which now leads us to the second of the two episodes that aired on Thursday, Under the Twin Moons. Here's what I liked in this episode. The episode is set up as Saru's final mission on Discovery, and there's a feeling of melancholy as he prepares to leave Starfleet to become an ambassador. There are some wonderful moments between him and Burnham as they make their way to the temple, where they will find their next clue. I love the discussion about how far Burnham has come since the early days of Discovery, and Saru's whole demeanor as this seasoned elder statesman of Discovery works very well for his character. Also, the grave disappointment unintentional pun? Love it. Book's return to Discovery is handled in a quiet scene between him and Burnham, with the latter teasing him with a holographic mouse. The scene works well, and while their relationship is definitely strained, it's nice to see the casual back and forth between the two of them. Speaking of Book, I really like the reunion between him and Culber, with the good doctor giving Book a big hug, reflecting the closeness the two of them experienced during Book's counseling sessions last season. One thing I neglected to mention with Red Directive is the change in the incidental music this season. The themes seem to be more triumphant, sprightly, and brassy, and while I loved the music in previous seasons, I really did, this is a welcome change, reflecting what seems to be a more upbeat and hopeful mission this season. The action sequence down on the planet also worked for me for the most part. There were a few moments where, as in every Trek story, the threat probably has the heroes dead to rights, but the plot armor is there to save them. However, there were moments where the on-set pyrotechnics and effects served to make it feel like the two of them were truly in real danger. Well done to the production staff on that one. I also really enjoyed the Indiana Jones-esque clues that led Maul and Locke to Beta Z, while the revelation of the fifth verse puts the Discovery crew on the right track to Trill. Paired with Saru's biological characteristics allowing him to see the hidden poem, I got a lot of enjoyment out of this scene. Give me a good mystery with some fun and interesting clues over strictly mindless action any day. This brings me to the new things we learn about our antagonists, Locke, and especially Mole. With the revelation in this episode that she is the daughter of Book's mentor, it seems that Mole will end up having a close connection to Book. I'm not yet sure what to make of that relationship, but as with much else in these episodes, I'm really eager to see where it all goes. I also really appreciated the scene in which Book uses the fancy flying from episode 1 to get an insight into Mole and Locke's personalities. It was a fun way to use what initially seemed to be a because it looks cool maneuver to contribute something more meaningful to the story. And finally, Captain Raynor. I loved that he calmed in with the assist to Adira and Tilly as they tried to work the problem facing Burnham and Saru. It's clear that while his methods and demeanor are frequently grating, he does care a lot about the mission and has a clear head to deal with problems. The theme of second chances permeates this episode, and I appreciate that Burnham's reflection on the chances that she was given leads her to offer Raynor the post of First Officer of Discovery. As he warns Burnham, he is not simply a yes man, a fact that she is counting on. I look forward to seeing their working relationship over the course of the season. To sum up my final thoughts on these episodes, I definitely appreciate what they're trying to do with this season. I truly hope that the everyone is in peril trope is indeed abandoned, and I love that they've linked this mystery to a particularly compelling piece of Trek lore. I think that the episodes do a great job of setting up the rest of the season, and I find myself torn. I both can't wait to watch the whole season and find out how everything turns out, and, in the words of Jean-Luc Picard,
I don't want the game to end.
I hope you're all looking forward to experiencing this season with me, and I really think it's going to be a lot of fun. For the second part of each of these videos, I plan to go through the Easter eggs and references sprinkled throughout the episode, and the two that open Season 5 of Discovery definitely have quite a few, especially given how they tie into past Star Trek lore. In Red Directive, we have the Federation celebrating their millennium anniversary, a little bit late due to the burn being a pressing concern when the actual date passed. The current year is 3190 or thereabouts, and the founding of the Federation was in 2161, a year first mentioned in the TNG episode The Outcast. The celebratory drinks that celebrate the Federation millennium are said to taste like Jumja sticks, a Bajoran confection frequently enjoyed on the promenade of Deep Space Nine. We see a Lurian, like Deep Space Nine's Morn, at the reception. Mention is made of the Tholian Republic and the Breen Imperium. This actually leads me to one other thing I loved in this episode, and something I hope we see more of this season: a wider view of the political arena of the 32nd century. Now that the burn is well behind the Federation, I would love to know more about this century, and who the major players are, and what has fundamentally changed since the 24th and 25th centuries. I really liked this hint about what some of the classic Trek species are up to these days. The vessel that Discovery is assigned to secure is a Romulan science vessel of a design first seen in the TNG episode The Next Phase. This vessel was itself a modification of the Romulan scout ship, first seen in TNG's The Defector. Aboard the vessel is a dead Romulan wearing a classic TNG Romulan uniform, which we will see again when we witness the recording of Dr. Velik later in the episode. Burnham is apparently following in Harry Kim's footsteps and learning the saxophone. There is a Tribble wandering Discovery's corridors, for some reason. The Romulan puzzle box is similar to the one we first saw Narek playing with in Season 1 of Star Trek Picard. There are a number of classic Star Trek location references in the star map we see. Among familiar names are Antos, Hyperia, Berengaria, Izar, Fesarius, and a station that looks to be labeled as Deep Space, possibly 5. Tilly wonders if she can just crash all of her students onto an ice moon to teach them to work together, which references her first teaching experience in the episode All Is Possible from last season. Fred is, of course, a Soong-type android, or synth, and even has AS in his serial number, which apparently references Alton Soong, whom we met at the end of Star Trek Picard's first season. Dr. Kovich's room features a Kurlan Nasakos, an artifact that was given to Captain Picard by his archaeology professor, Richard Galen, in the TNG episode The Chase, and seen in many episodes throughout the rest of TNG. The Kurlan Nasakos also made an appearance in Star Trek Picard. And of course we have all of the other references to The Chase, and the revelation that the man behind this mystery, Dr. Velik, was present at those events. We also see an image of Captain Picard, and there is a hint of the Star Trek Picard theme music over this part of the scene. Also shown is the image of the holographic recording of the ancient humanoid herself, played by Salome Jens, who would later go on to play the changeling leader on Deep Space Nine. Moving on to the references in Under the Twin Moons, we get another reference to the Breen, indicating that they're experiencing infighting over a new leader. We also learn that the Orions are currently regrouping. The planet Discovery visits is said to be home to a Promelian burial ground. The Promelians were first referenced in the TNG episode Booby Trap, in which the crew of the Enterprise discovers an ancient Promelian battlecruiser, abandoned for centuries in the rubble of the final battle between the Promelians and the Menthars. The ship in that episode is said to be powered by Lang cycle fusion reactors, a technology that is also referenced later in this episode by Zora. Saru's nickname in this episode, Action Saru, was given to him by Jet Reno in the aftermath of their encounter with Zara in the Season 3 episode Far From Home, shortly after Discovery and her crew arrived in the 32nd century. We of course have the references to Burnham's backstory and how she came aboard Discovery as a convicted criminal back in Season 1 of the show. Action Saru uses his attack spines to take out a number of the drones, which we first saw in the Season 2 episode The Sound of Thunder. As I mentioned earlier, the Romulan poem that Burnham and Saru discover references Beta Z, notably in its mention of a world where thoughts are shared and containing opaline waters. The latter reference brings to mind the Opal Sea, a body of water on Beta Z first mentioned in Star Trek Nemesis. Romulan psychology in the 24th century comes into play when Burnham and Saru realize a verse of the poem is missing. They reference Romulan homes having a false front door for strangers, a concept first mentioned in the Star Trek Picard episode, The End is the Beginning. The newly discovered fifth verse will lead Burnham and Saru to another classic Star Trek world, and one they visited a couple of seasons ago already on Star Trek Discovery, Trill. When Saru is saying goodbye to Burnham, he warns her not to touch the swamp kelp while it is in bloom, the same warning he gave to Tilly last season when she was looking after his plants. I wonder what it does. And finally, when Burnham is listing Captain Raynor's accolades, she mentions the Grand Kite Order of Tactics, an award that was first mentioned in the classic TOS episode Court Martial as an achievement that Captain James T. Kirk had attained. Well, that's what I found for continuity and canon references in these two episodes. What did I miss? I'm sure I missed a few. Please let me know by reaching out in the comments below or getting in touch on Facebook or Twitter. Thank you so much for watching, and thanks especially to the Patreon supporters. I truly appreciate each and every one of you who watches these videos. Keep watching as we make our way through this final season of Star Trek Discovery. Next week, a journey to Trill in the episode Janal. Until then, I've been Dan Gunther. Live long and prosper.